everyone. Thank you all for coming here today. It's such a beautiful occasion, and we have almost a full room. So thank you so much. So I'm gonna be kicking off the event by just doing a little bit introduction. So my name is Sally, and I am the co-director of the Fashion, Energy, and Climate Network at the Columbia Climate School. I'm also a research associate at the Center on Global Energy Policy, which is part of the School of International and Public Affairs. It's already Friday today, so it's almost the end of the climate week. Um, I believe all of you have had a very busy week attending many different events around the city. And I know there are a number of fashion related events for this climate week. And I am personally fortunate enough to attend a number of them as well. And I'm so happy to see some familiar faces here. So on Monday, I attended a summit called the Fusion Fashion Tech Summit. And Wednesday, I attended an event at Tapestry and the Fashion Pack on financing fashion decarbonization. And I believe we have a few people from the Fashion Pack here today. And in the evening, I attended a Global Fashion Agenda's Policy Masterclass, and our lovely host, Marina and Holly, is here today as well. So welcome. And just yesterday, I went to this very fun interactive event at the Columbia Climate School called Forward Food and Fashion. And one of our hosts, Sandra, is here. She'll be giving the keynote remark later. It's a very interesting event that explores intersection of solution focusing on both food and the fashion industry. And this event it really gave me a lot of optimism as it really shows that the fashion industry is gaining more attention now in terms of decarbonization and reaching carbon neutrality. But the reality is that there's still so much work that needs to be done, and the collaboration remains critical. So from the Forward Food and Fashion yesterday, they mentioned a couple of statistics that really stood out to me and really highlighted some environmental challenges facing the fashion industry today. And I just want to share it here with you guys as well. So 85% of textiles end up in dumps, and 35% of microplastic in ocean come from synthetic materials used in fashion. So these figures are a reminder of the significant environmental impact we must address, and today's conversation will dig deeper into these challenges. One of the things that I am particularly excited about the event today is that the Columbia Climate School and the Center on Global Energy Policy are co-hosting this event together, combining both energy and climate perspectives to create a more holistic conversation around fashion's transition. And since we're talking about the Columbia Climate School, I also want to take this opportunity to make a very exciting announcement. We're officially launching the Fashion, Energy, and Climate Network. It's part of this year's cohort of the Earth Network program at the Climate School. It's also very special. We're very proud that this will be the very first initiative at the Columbia University that focuses on the intersection of fashion system, climate change, and energy transition. And through this initiative, we hope to gather together key stakeholders in fashion to find effective and long-term solutions to make a difference to the fashion system and make it more environmental friendly and more human friendly as well. And here today, we're very fortunate to have two of our key members with us. Jess, who's sorry. Oh, kind of, oh, okay. Around so very fortunate to have two of our key members here today. So the first one is Jess. She's in the back of the room. Besides part of Network, she also leads the Women in Energy program at the Center on Global Energy Policy. So her work is very important. I also want to introduce my co-director, who just entered the room, Kevin, with whom I previously worked on a food system project at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. He has a deep knowledge about cotton production and regenerative agriculture. So if any of you are interested in these topics, feel free to talk to them both afterwards. So as we grow the network, we really look forward to partnering and collaborating with many of you here. One of the key goals for the event today is to highlight the interconnections between different thematic areas of the fashion transition so we can come up with more collaborative and holistic solutions. So now before we dive into today's discussion, I just want to get a sense of our audience. Can you raise your hand if you're from a brand, a fashion brand? Ooh, so we got a number of you guys here. And anyone from a policy world working on transition policies? Yes, we get. Yes, of course, Marina. We all know your very wonderful policy masterclass. And material suppliers. Wow, we have a number of these as well. Yes, of course, Dennis. And service provider. Yes, we have a number of service providers as well. And students, of course, because we're at a university. Wow, we have so many students. So you guys are the future. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So this is really fantastic to see. We have a great mixture of people here today and to talk about these challenges. Okay, without further ado, I'm gonna start today's program. So we're gonna have a keynote address followed by two panel discussions. The first panel discussion will focus on energy transition and innovation, and the second one will explore policy, finance, and business models that can help with the transition. With that, I am delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Sandra Goldmark, Associate Dean at Columbia Climate School, also professor at Barnard College, who will help set the stage for today's conversation. Sandra, the floor is all yours.
Can I use the handheld? Can you hear me? Okay, raise your hand in the back if you can't. Or shout. Hi, 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 good morning. It's Friday of Climate Week. And some of you are coming off Fashion Week too, I think, right? All right, who's tired? Thank you for being here. Thank you to Sally and Kevin and the network for organizing this event and bringing us all together. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how busy was this week for you? Shout it out. 10, okay. I did better. I was putting mine at an 8. Did you learn something new? Awesome, me too. This is a little bit of a sidebar. I'm really just curious. Who came yesterday to Food and Fashion? No shame if you did or did not. All right. If you hear a few repeat themes, apologies. I was just curious because I have been a little sub-thread for this week for me, as I'm sure for some of you, has been thinking about these times when we come together, these convenings, the Fashion Weeks, the Climate Week, the Earth Week, the conferences. And I've just been curious and thinking about how do they fit into our change-making process, our attempt to get organized and our attempts to move the needle. I don't have an answer. Maybe there's a student here who can do a nice master's thesis on this and come tell me for next year. But I've just been watching it as a participant and a bystander. And it's obviously something that we do as humans, and that is part of this movement to change our story. And yet, you often hear frustration in these weeks about, is this moving the needle? Is this part of making the change? And so I don't know. I'm just opening that as a thing I've been pondering this week. I've also been enjoying this week. I had 2 kind of clothing-related events back-to-back, end of the week. I started with offshore wind. That was one of my learning moments. And ending with clothing. And so I've been enjoying the whole week watching the little stories that people are telling with their clothes throughout the week and what they're wearing and how they're moving through this week together, meeting each other. It's very interesting. Now I feel like you're all looking at my clothes. I'm really not trying to make a big statement, but you know. So my name is Sandra Goldmark. I am a professor of practice at Barnard College, where I teach design and I work on the circular economy. And I'm an associate dean for interdisciplinary engagement at the still brand new, I think we can say that, Columbia University Climate School. I started my career, though, as a designer, not fashion, as a scenery and costume designer in theater. I got into that career because I loved 2 things. I loved making stuff, especially in the beginning with my hands, alone at night in the theater after everyone's gone home, painting and sewing and bad carpentry. And I loved telling stories. So that's what I did after college for a long time. But after many years of that, doing a lot of shows, show after show, when you really get going, you're doing 10 or 12 shows a year. And what I did not love about that version of storytelling was that I was putting those shows in the dumpster after every single show. Loads and loads of scenery, thousands of pounds of waste. And I was putting a lot of clothing up on stage on actors' bodies with no real consideration of where it came from, who made it, how much the person who made it was paid. You all know this song and dance. Many designers I know have gone through this little journey. And I especially noticed how here in New York, we were very sensitive to wage equity in our industry locally, fighting tooth and nail for every dollar of a design fee that we could get, every union raise for the stitchers backstage on Broadway and the non-union stitchers off Broadway and regionally. But we weren't thinking about the people making our clothes overseas and how much they were paid. If it wasn't built in the shop, we weren't really thinking about the labor that went into all the purchased garments. So I was telling stories, right, with my labor, but I wasn't sure that I was committed to the story that I was telling, or that I got into the art form to tell that particular story. It was not a good one. And I was not alone. Theater is, of course, a very tiny corner of a much bigger industry that I suspect many people in this room are part of and intimately familiar with, that much bigger version of the design, production, consumption, and waste landscape. But the theater is a little microcosm of it, and it didn't feel good. So I thought I would quit. I thought, let me get out of here. I'm not going to do this anymore. And then I had a brief idea that maybe I would become a playwright or a director and write plays about recycling. And then I thought, well, that's a terrible idea. A, I don't want to write a play about recycling. B, nobody would or should ever go see that play. And that wasn't why I got into it. I liked making things. I liked telling stories with stuff. So this was around 2011. I started just changing my own designs. That was all I knew how to start with, and my own shopping habits. And I started playing around in my designs with reuse. I was just secretly said, I'm not going to buy anything new. Because that's where I thought I could start. I won't put anything new on stage for a few shows. Then I started exploring repair. I did not know at the time that there was this term called the circularity or the circular economy. But you stumble into these things when you learn about what some of the other actions really mean. And I realized very quickly that what I started calling the one fed-up designer model wasn't going to work. Because I was getting hired show after show, and I could go to that theater and say, let's make this coat out of all Poland Spring bottles. It's going to be genius, right? Or let's make this, platform out of whatever. And I would leave the theater, the next designer would get hired, and it was right back to business as usual. And I even realized that in my own home department at Barnard, where we were producing show after show every year, and I wasn't designing everyone, and we'd bring in guest designers, and so I could make my coats out of Poland Spring bottles or whatever, but the next designer would come in, and we were kind of back to square one. So that is where we started realizing in our department we needed to get organized. We needed to change our systems, our business as usual, in the very small system that was the Barnard College Department of Theater. We started first by just tracking reuse. We just started saying, how much new material are we using? Again, this is 2011. Doesn't sound very revolutionary now, but it was okay. In theater, nobody had ever thought to put a number on it. We started tracking reuse. And then we started splitting our material lines. For any show, any project, we would have 2 budget lines instead of 1 for materials. 1 budget line for new materials and 1 for used. Then we started building that into our hiring process. And we would say, hey, other designer, not Sandra, who may or may not care about making coats out of Poland Spring bottles, when you work here, this is your budget. And we expect you to stick to these 2 different budget lines. And something really interesting happened, which is we started really all of this. We were coming at it from the waste perspective still at that point. We were just so sick of filling dumpsters. And what happened was all of a sudden we didn't need to rent dumpsters anymore because we were using a lot less new materials. This is a little bit more scenery, but the costumes was similar. So all of a sudden, and this sentence had never before been uttered in the history of the American theater, all of a sudden we had a little extra money. And we were like, what the hell are we gonna do with it? And of course, the answer was we need to pay people more. We had been fighting for years for better fees for our designers, and we just couldn't move the needle. We just couldn't get any motion in the system on fees. There was some fear, oh, if we pay people more, this is gonna, I don't know, the sky was gonna fall down. But we had our little dumpster funds, and nobody in the, higher up in the administration really knew if we spent the money on the dumpster or the designer. So we just started taking money from our materials line and our dumpster line and putting it towards fees. And over the course of about 3 or 4 years, we raised design and prop artisan fees by 60 to 70%. So we started working on waste, and we wound up working on wage equity in our little corner of the universe. And then we kept going. We put it into our hiring practices. We started putting out handbooks. We built resources for other theater departments and organizations. We put it into the mission statement of the department now. We changed our story of our little department. And it happened because we got organized. We turned sustainability impulse from the one fed-up designer, the one fed-up production manager, I was not alone, and we turned it into a hiring and compensation policy, a budget tracking mechanism, and a public commitment. So I'm gonna pause there. I have been very lucky since that time to be able to switch to a different kind of design now. Instead of designing scenery or costumes, I'm helping to design a brand new climate school here at Columbia University. One dedicated to equipping young leaders to make change in their industries. Within the school, I lead the Earth Networks program. This is a program where it's kind of a grassroots program where people can come together and apply for 3 years of early stage funding to come together around a topic related to the climate school's mission. We have networks on environmental justice, coastal resilience, plastic pollution, co-production of knowledge, so many different topics. They produce a range of work. The Climate Imaginations Network produced a climate imaginarium on Governor's Island this summer, bringing together storytellers and artists to think about how they can make change. Some networks are publishing books, creating new courses, partnering with external organizations. There's no one recipe for what these networks do. But what the networks do have in common is that they are addressing what they perceive as a gap. Either a gap in knowledge, like the co-production network thinks that we need the best practices on how do we actually effectively work with communities to create science together. Or sometimes it's a gap internally here at Columbia, like Sally and Kevin, who realized there wasn't really a single place for people working on fashion and textiles and sustainability to come together at Columbia University. And of course, the thing that unites them is they're all coming together to change the story of whatever piece of this puzzle they're working on. So I'm really grateful to Sally and Kevin for bringing us here today, because to fill that gap and to invite you all to begin to help Columbia join the story of change-making in fashion. And I want to return to that for just a minute, to clothing. Robert Ross, who's read Clothing: A Global History? Oh my God, you all have to buy it. It's a great book. He wrote, "Getting dressed in the morning is inherently a political act." And as any good costumer or designer knows, clothing is one of the ways that we communicate in the world. As individuals, we communicate our group affiliations, our status, our gender, our occupation, our task for the day or of the moment. We communicate how we feel. We tell a story of who we are. Sometimes we lie with our clothes. And we don't just tell that story as individuals, right? We tell them as communities, as societies, as groups, even as a species. Because let's not forget that getting dressed in the morning is one of the fundamental acts that makes us human. Sounds a little silly, but it's true. What do all human cultures have in common? Just a few things: language, cooked food, religion, art, collaboration, dress. We all have codes of dress, a language of clothing. We are all speaking and telling a story every morning, every day, individually and collectively. And far too often, as we all know in this room, it's not a good story. It's one of waste on the global scale. It's one of extractive processes that harm the earth and that harm the people making clothes. And in places like New York City, it's far too often one of wasteful consumption. I want to pause and name that not every story of clothing right now in the world is bad. There is a lot going on, from ancient and traditional techniques that have worked for millennia and continue to work, from new technologies that are totally inspiring. In some ways, I love, as someone interested broadly in circular economy and consumption, I love the fashion industry because I think it's where you find so much of the most exciting innovation. In some ways, I think this industry took so many hits and stepped in it so many times, no offense, that some of the most exciting work is happening here. But of course, as we know, largely speaking, there is a lot of work to do on that collective story of clothing. And I'm so excited. It's an honor to be here in the room today with so many people who are working on changing that story. And I'm grateful to Sally and Kevin for gathering us to begin to tell a new story of clothing. I think, as Sally did with the hand raise, it's also really interesting to think about the ways, the pieces of the puzzle that are needed to change that story, from the 1 or 2 or 3 or 1,000 fed-up designers, to the policymakers, to the people who are willing to build those reverse logistics and those tracking mechanisms, to the people like Sally and Kevin who are going to bring us together. Getting dressed is inherently a political act, and so is getting organized. So thank you to Sally, Kevin, and all of the leaders we're going to hear from today, and all of you for getting us organized. Let's get to work.
So thank you for being here today, and thank you, Sandra, for sharing such inspiring personal story. And I think sometimes we just need to look at how we get started to, reflect our intention and why we're doing something. So next, we're gonna move into session 1. So let's invite our panelists for session 1 onto the stage. So we have Amy Jaffe, and we have Dennis Nobelius. Welcome. So welcome to session 1, Energy Transition and Innovation. So in this session, we're going to explore how fashion industry can reduce its reliance on fossil fuel and scale up the clean energy transition. Before we start, I'm gonna do a brief introduction of our esteemed panelists. So Amy Jaffe is the co-chair of our Women in Energy program at the Center of Global Energy Policy, and she's also the director of Energy, Climate Justice and Sustainability Lab at New York University. Amy brings deep expertise in energy transition and how industry can phase out fossil fuels. And she's also a fashionista. And Dennis is the CEO of Syra, whose company is at the forefront of scaling polyester recycling and circular solution in the fashion industry. And they're going to be helping H&M to fulfill their polyester recycling goals in the next decade. So now I would like to frame discussion with 2 key questions for all of the audience, and just to keep in mind as we dive through the discussion. The first question is, how can the fashion industry remove fossil fuels from its value chain and transition into clean energy? And the second question to keep in mind is, what are the most promising innovations that help scale textile, including polyester recycling and circularity across the industry? So now we're gonna get started by asking Amy the first question. And so we really want to paint a clear map just to show people what is the impact in terms of greenhouse gas emission from the fashion industry, and where are those emissions are coming from? Can you share some insight on this?
Okay, so I'm going to give you the actual, estimated number, but it probably won't mean much to a lot of people in the audience. So each year, the fashion industry, I'm making a distinction, not to the textile industry, which is much larger, but just the fashion industry itself, is 2.1 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas emitted. The projections is that it's going to go up to 2.7 billion metric tons by 2030. So that process has to do with not only the whole manufacturing process and the shipping of the clothes. There's overproduction by the industry. Some of you in the audience know what I mean by the term bracketing. But for my students here at Columbia, let me just tell you what bracketing is. Bracketing is the fashion industry routinely produces roughly 30% more clothes than they know they're going to sell, so that they can have you buy online, tell you to try it in 4 or 5 different colors. You pick the one you want, and then you send back the other one in the free box. And you are not realizing that they do not resell those other pieces of item. Okay, those pieces of item, if it's a very high-end brand, go into an incinerator so it doesn't come out on the sale rack, or it goes to waste. And I think that people don't really understand that. And I think the other thing that people don't understand, which is in my world, is when you're here at Columbia, and you hear executives from the fossil fuel industry tell you that we can't peak use, we can't keep it in the ground, we can't do these things because the world has a great need for their product. Understand that when people tell you that oil demand is going to go up, that 60% of that increase is coming from petrochemicals. So what are you actually wearing? Raise your hand right now if you think you know what are the fibers that are in the clothes you're wearing right now. Raise your hand if you know. Oh, great audience. Okay. So I used to joke that if we made the fashion industry actually put on the label, not their code words, but what you're actually wearing in terms of the fabric, this is what you would know. They would have to put crude oil on the label of anybody in this room wearing nylon. Nylon is a material that's comprised of repeating large molecule chains made directly from crude oil. Okay, if you're wearing polyester, which is most of us, didn't used to be the biggest thing, and synthetics is now 2/3 of all fabric and clothes. Used to be a much smaller number. So polyester is a spun fiber version of the same petrochemical mix, ethylene glycol and terephthalic acid, PET, that goes into the plastic water bottles that you're no longer using. And so when your clothes go into landfill, you're talking about 200 years, they will still be there intact. And I'm just explaining to you that you're wearing plastic water bottles even though you're not using them. And then the third thing is a little bit less prominent in clothes. It's usually about 10% of your clothes or 20% of your clothes. That's called elastane or spandex. And that's because, you just really can't get it together with your jeans. You really need a little bit of stretch, right? Or you're very spiritually mindset, being mindful and doing yoga, right? The key input into your clothes, if they're spandex related, is polyurethane. And I think that we need to step back. I mean, I can talk to you more about energy efficiency and the use of renewable energy versus coal or natural gas for the heating units that, after you've dyed the material, that re-dry the material. But I think first and foremost, if everybody in this room would tell everybody they know what I just told you about where these fabrics come from. And we have the New York Fashion Act. If we could get to the point where brands had to actually reveal, not some euphemistic word like synthetic fabric, actually reveal the petrochemicals that you are wearing. I won't mention the brand because I know they're here. But there are brands that are selling you 1,000 thread cotton sheets because you are thinking to yourself, you do not want to sleep in a petrochemical sheet. And then you are putting on petrochemical plastic pajamas next to your skin to sleep in these $400 or $800 sheets that you've selected because they're organic cotton. So I'm just letting you understand that so we can start the conversation with that information.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you for highlighting the concept of bracketing. And I think that's really one of the biggest problems right now is overproduction. And this is something that we're going to dig into even deeper during the next session discussion. And then you mentioned a lot of things about petrochemical synthetic material. And based on that, I guess the petrochemical material and just material production in general perhaps represent the largest decarbonization and energy transition opportunities in the fashion industry. Do you think that's a true statement?
So really, of course, first and foremost, the fashion industry is not utilizing purposefully renewable energy. So, China has decarbonization goals, but a lot of their electricity system, of course, is generating from coal. But also, if you think about it, a lot of the washing and dyeing process requires high heat. And a lot of those high heat units, again, are either being fueled by coal or, if in China, but in many places it's natural gas. And so again, if you're wanting to switch natural gas out of your home, but again, you are wearing all these fabrics that are generated, the heat is generated with natural gas, that's another one. And then for the brands, I don't see a lot of brands, I see a lot of brands saying they're using recycled fabric. That's great. Of course, mindful if you're bracketing with PET fabric, eventually, that fabric eventually winds up in a landfill and it's still 200 years, right? So new materials, I think, is a big issue. But beyond that, if you're a brand, do you have energy efficiency in your office building? What's your energy efficiency for your retail stores? What kind of tracking or thinking do you have about the energy that's being used when you ship your products from manufacturing to your distribution centers? And are you using optimization in your retail the way some other kinds of industries do, so that people have noticed that maybe Amazon is delivering a package to you, your neighbor, and the reason that is happening is there's a computerized algorithm that goes from the distribution center that's minimizing the amount of fuel that's used to bringing everybody their goods. So, how integrated in terms of supply chain is the fashion industry? Has the fashion industry even thought about their energy use? I know there's a lot of attention to water, but really has the industry sat down and really looked at their energy use?
Yes, thank you for highlighting different parts of energy use in the fashion industry, beyond the company brand, their own operation, but also throughout the supply chain, especially the suppliers, because I feel like a lot of times suppliers are carrying more and more responsibilities. So that's why we need the more, you mentioned, integrated approach and collaborations. And
So another thing that I just in talking to people when I came in, so I don't want to make assumptions, I don't know the industry practice quite as well as people in the audience. That's always a little dangerous thing. But there's been, I think, attention about tracking your supply chain for labor. And that same tracking of supply chain in other industries, that tracking has gone back to things like greenhouse gas emissions in manufacturing. The car industry certainly does that with their suppliers, and other industries do that with their suppliers. And so I guess my question for the rest of the panelists who are going to come up on stage is that a common practice in the industry? Do people actually know who their suppliers are? I know a little bit about is it Shane? I never pronounced it correctly.
Yes. Do we have anyone from Shein here today?
Okay, well, maybe
Yes,
you
we'll
can
talk
help
afterwards.
us a little bit about whether or not, are they integrated into China's system for lowering emissions? And do the people who are taking clothing from them and selling them and distributing them in other countries, are they aware of what those practices are? So these are all questions that we should all be discussing and putting together implementation plans to lock down. I won't buy your clothing unless I know this or that about your supply chain. And I know there are some very big American brands that have lobbied Washington to avoid having to do that on the labor issue. I know who you are. Okay, I've looked at that issue because I teach sustainability at NYU and previous schools. Now you're going to have to not only consider that practice and whether or not you're a patriotic brand or not, you're going to also have to consider the energy usage and other kinds of fabric materials and so forth in your supply chain going forward, because it will eventually be regulated.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you for the Shein team joining us today. I really appreciate, like you're joining the conversation. That's what we need. We need to talk and learn from each other and, what each other are doing. And Amy, I have one more question for you. Like fashion sector traditionally has been quite overlooked when it's being set like carbon emission goals. It's kind of like the food system. It's not until recent years, you look at major countries, they put like food waste and things into their like a carbon peaking and carbon neutrality goals. Just from an energy expert perspective, do you think it is necessary and it is important to bring fashion at kind of the equivalent place as, for example, decarbonizing the transportation sector, for example, and building sector?
So let me be clear.
And then I just want to say we're kind of have a time limitation,
I'll be very quick.
Let's keep it like
Very quick. It's very, very simple. The fashion industry emissions, if the fashion industry was a country, it would be ranked the 5th largest emitter in the world. Only after the United States, China, India, and Russia. And if you looked at it from the perspective of another industry that we all think of as high emitting, like airline industry, aviation industry, it's twice as large as the emissions of the aviation industry.
Thank you so much, Amy, for sharing your insights on the emission reduction and decarbonization transition in the fashion industry. And now we're gonna move to Sarah and Dennis. And then before we ask him question, I want to show you guys this video about Sarah, just to get an idea how they're recycling polyester. How do I play? Huh? Space.
Part of our everyday life. But the way we produce and consume them must change. Vast amounts of textiles go to waste every single day. It's a growing global challenge. The textile industry accounts for up to 10% of the global CO2e emissions. That's why we have founded CYRA. CYRA marks the start of the great textile shift. We want to decarbonize and de-waste textiles, starting with the world's biggest fiber, polyester. We are implementing textile-to-textile recycling, putting textile waste to use over and over again. Our vision is simply a world where every textile and sees a new day. But what really sets us apart is our groundbreaking technology.
I see some other YouTube things. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And this is the most important point of the entire Climate Week for me, because the interaction with students.
Preparation,
I also would like to note that if you ever put up that play then, Sandra, then at least I will be in that audience for watching the recycling play.
Did you know that chemical textile recycling offers you a new approach to a more sustainable textile business?
Making a very stupid joke.
At Andrit, we can help you turn your ideas
Dennis.
into reality.
And that's a really wonderful video. I like how the technology sound in the background is getting louder and louder,
such as cellulose,
speak really
other
loud
recyclable
in order to
components,
talk about,
like polyester,
technology.
and
So
other
the
materials
video
with
highlighted
possible
one
future
thing very
use, such as
unique about
nylon.
Syra is the scale of
The
your
recyclable
recycling.
components
Can
become
you
raw materials, production of
explain a
new
little bit more
textiles.
how Syra is scaling
And
the
these
polyester
textiles later
recycling,
become
and
textile-
specifically how fast are you scaling the polyester recycling?
Oh, thank you. I'll be happy to do that. So first of all, this is pretty strange, I think, but we were started by a CFO at H&M. So he was looking at the sustainability targets and seeing that there was no really partner at scale that could provide them with achieving their sustainability targets and getting this to play. So that's how it all started. They also recognized that this needs to be an industry movement. So it's not a unique H&M venture that we are. We're an independent company. We have different investors on board, and we're happy to collaborate with others. But the choice was really to look at the overall fiber use inside the company and choosing the one that they use the most, the polyester. Like 54%, to your comment as well before, of all the world's fibers today is polyester. And it's actually growing substantially. And like 1% is being recycled properly. And that cannot really happen. It needs to change. And then we need partners that can do that at scale. So that's what we are focusing on. And the way we are scaling is like crazy because they're doing things in parallel, which you normally would do in sequence. So we have an R&D pilot facility in North Carolina. We're building a mini plant or a blueprint plant, same state. And we are simultaneously then establishing giga plants in Vietnam, Portugal, India, and so on. So 12 plants across the globe in the next decade. And that will still only be around 3% of the world's use of polyester. So we would need substantially more partners to do this, because we can simply not continue to put out 60 million metric tons of polyester every year without being able to take care of it. And maybe one more comment on that. Because polyester today, we say, it would be great if we could go for a natural fiber. But the use of polyester is so vast. We find it in fashion apparel. We find it in airbags. We find it in seat belts. You find it in automotive in so many areas. And you also find it in home interior, like in carpets, in sofas. So it's widely spread because it's a very useful fiber, cost efficient and useful. So all the textile waste that is out there, we would like to look upon that as a raw material that we can reuse over and over again. And what you see here, I brought that prop because it's always fun to see something for real. This is made by our technology. It used to be textile waste, and now we brought it back to yarn again. And we'd like to continue to do that over and over again. And we chose to start with polyester because that is the biggest fiber. But we also look upon ourselves as a textile powerhouse and be happy to add other fibers along the way. But we simply need to bring the polyester to a circular mode quickly. That was a long response.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing a very comprehensive overview. And the next question I want to ask you, because you guys are growing so fast, I know like running a business and scaling up technology is not without challenges. Can you tell us what are some of the challenges that you have encountered?
That's good. Then it's good to be at the university. We would like to be even better at the decoloring, because when we get in post-consumer waste, we have no idea what we get in. So we get in different colors, different materials, different coatings. Imagine an airbag being back to a fiber again. So that is definitely a part of the challenges. We also recognize that this is also a cost game, because imagine if putting what you already have out there as a waste back to fiber again. And when we can do that even cheaper than doing it from crude oil, then you remove all kind of barriers. So that is what we are targeting, really getting down in cost over time, because that's when you really make a significant change.
Sorry, I just want to follow up on the cost point. How is it more expensive than the regular original polyester nowadays, the recycled ones?
I mean, cost also follows volume. So it's depending. If you're a big company, then you get a better price. So of course, what we are looking into here is that we are having, to our knowledge, the most favorable cost position among the industry, and we're targeting to be a little bit above the PET to fiber, the bottle to fiber, as you mentioned before. That's not the circular solution. That's like one step more before you landfill or incineration. So we are targeting that kind of price positioning. Because also at the end, we need to be an investable business because we bring in TPG, Rise Climate, and a number of, the IKEA investment arm, the automotive industry is also part of our investor. So we need to bring them good return. And that is also actually great. To make a sustainable business happening, it needs also to be profitable.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing both progress and the challenges for scaling up the polyester recycling. And you mentioned that you have a partnership with H&M right now to fulfill their polyester recycling goal and hopefully onboarding more brands in the future. Can you tell us more about your partnership with H&M?
Yeah, so they started the company and teamed up with another company called Vargas, who is really good at scaling. So that's the effort put in place. So they are part of our board. We're an independent company. We have other partners as well on board. But the foundation was really the commercial negotiations that we did last year. So it took like 6 to 9 months to land a contract with the purchasing, legal, commercial team of H&M, not the one starting the company. And then we landed on a commercial offtake that is great to actually bring on board. It's for 7 years. It is 50% of all the forecasted polyester by H&M. And the share value of that is around $600 million. And of course, if you have that kind of commitment from any kind of customers, then it's easy to do two things. You can bring other investors on board. You can start to build the plans to really become this global partner. And you can also mirror that into the feedstock area. So then we can go to the waste management handlers, the charity organizations, everything, and say, we got this customer commitment. And now we would like to offer you an offtake agreement on similar terms and similar length. And then they can invest and bring out the sorting and collecting that is so important to get the entire ecosystem to work. So I think that is really a key.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm very looking forward to see, in the next decade and how it helped H&M scale up their recycled material garments. Because I feel one of the challenges for them now, they do have this conscious line, but I believe it's a very small percentage of their total sales. So I'm really excited to see the changes and progress in the future. And I think we have 3 minutes left for this session. And I want to take one question from the audience.
Sally, 1 second. I just want to clarify something. When you're wearing virgin polyester, it's the same physical material. In other words, it's not from the bottles itself. They're taking the PET that goes into a mold to make a bottle, and they're spinning it into a fiber instead of the bottle. So I just want to make that clear that virgin polyester is actually an original fiber coming from the same material, same chemical.
Thank you, Amy. This is a very good point. Yes, and sorry, the question. Yes.
Thanks so much. I'm Holly with GFA, and I was just curious if you could explain what type of feedstocks you can process, if pre-processing is needed, and what the output is, and if, sorry, it's a bit of a long one, but if the output requires any changes in the spinning process as well.
Super good. Some of those responses or answers we do not have yet because we are still a scale up. But what we do is that the contract we do now is 90% polyester rich content. So that's a waste that we are actively buying right now and securing contract in Americas, in Europe, and in Southeast Asia. So that's what we're now buying. But the technology that we have, that can actually pull out polyester from any kind of percentages. But of course, if that would be 10% coming in, then you have 90% as a byproduct, our waste, and that is not okay. So we need to really figure out what do we do with the right now 10%, and we are having business development work going on to secure that we can bring that to life in another industry perhaps. But that is right now how it works. And the way we process it, it will take one more second on that. So we bring it into 28 tons of pre-processing units where we shred the material, bring out the trims and buttons and zippers, and then we actually do some granulate, similar processes to that has been existing in other industries. And then we mix it with ethylene glycol, which is a very friendly chemical. We reuse that in the system and depolymerize down to the monomer, build it up to the polymer again, and then you have the flakes or something that you can spin.
Thank you, Dennis and Amy. This is a very insightful discussion. And just to sum it up, we talk about energy transition, the importance of energy transition for fashion, and the importance of fashion to energy transition, both ways, and also innovation and textile recycling. And our time is up, but I just also want to highlight that Amy, she's the perfect person to talk to if you love fashion, you love, following trend styling, but at the same time, you're also very sustainability and eco-conscious. I think she's the perfect person to talk to, and then she will give you a lot of styling advice, like how to be eco-friendly and stylish at the same time. So thank you both, and thank you for. Okay, now we're at session 2. Let's welcome our speakers first. So we have Nikolai from Ghani. And we have Sarah from the Business of Fashion. And we have Trisha from Accelerating Circularity and Transformer Foundation. And last but not least, we have Maxine Bédat from the New Standard Institute. Yes. Welcome, everyone. Okay. Our second session is on policy, finance, and business models. So I'm going to introduce more about our speakers, but now I'm just going to start again by asking the audience to keep 2 key questions in mind as we go through the session. The first question is, how can policy drive systematic change in the fashion industry? And what role do regulations like the New York Fashion Act play in this transformation? The second question is, what financing schemes and business models will help brands and stakeholders in the fashion supply chain move toward circularity while balancing their financial ambition? Now, let me introduce a little bit more about our panelists for today's discussion. So next to me, we have Maxine Bédat. So she's the founder and director of the New Standard Institute, and she also played a key role in drafting the New York State Fashion Act. And then we have Trisha Carey, who is a board member at the Transformers Foundation and Accelerating Circularity. She brings valuable insight into financing the circular economy and engaging financial stakeholders. And we have Sarah Kent. She's the Chief Sustainability Correspondent at the Business of Fashion. She has a deep understanding of the industry's progress and, most importantly, barriers in the sustainable transition. And last but not least, we have Nikolai. I'm gonna try it really hard to pronounce that last name. It's half step. Can you show the audience how to pronounce your last name correctly?
Yeah, Refstrup.
Oh, that's not even. Sorry. He taught me how to pronounce the last name on our Zoom prep call, but I guess I was just not that good a student. Sorry about that.
Words. I answer to anything.
So he is the founder of Ghani, one of the most well-known brand from the Nordics, and the brand is recognized for balancing business growth with environmental and social responsibility through forward-thinking business models. Okay, so now we're gonna start with our first question. We're gonna start with policy first. So Maxine, let's talk about the New York Fashion Act. So you played a very important role drafting the act. Can you talk about your personal story, like what inspired you to draft the act, and just also briefly summarize about what the New York Fashion Act is to the audience?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for putting this on, and thank you for microphones. There we go. That should work, right? Okay. It is so good to be back home here at Columbia because I spent 7 years of my life here. The first 4 at Barnard and the second 3 at the law school. Is anybody here from either Barnard or the law school? Yay! Okay, great. Fantastic. So I think it's so nice. Yeah, it's so nice to be home, and I feel like I should, at least my tuition should have afforded me the Columbia affiliation on my name tag. But
We'll get a bigger name tag next time.
But in undergrad, I was curious about, like, how did the world work? I just wanted to understand how the world worked, and it was quite a different time, and so I think I majored in political science, minored in economics and psychology, and I think my parents were very confused, and I was confused as to what I was doing. But it helped me. These were different lenses in which to understand the world, and then I went to law school because I'm a child of immigrants, and that's what you do. But what I understood from law school was that we operate in a world of laws that we don't even see. And we don't even know that we're operating in either a world of laws or a world of a lack of laws. And that has been a very important framework for me to understand as I then navigated a fashion startup, venture-backed fashion startup. And it was through that work trying to do sustainability, but really trying to actually move the needle, that framework of law came back. Because as I was working with co-founder and team and raising capital, I was realizing that even though we were trying to do the most sustainable, least impactful, which I think is a more accurate framing thing, fast fashion was getting faster, consumption was increasing, and the reason why that matters is because emissions were increasing along with it, chemical use was increasing alongside it. So we were winning as a company and losing as a society. And so that is what then got my interest in how I looked at other industries, like how have we seen change in other industries? And that's why I think being at Columbia and in the climate school is so important. Regulation has played an incredibly important and driving role in other industries that are making progress. And yet for this industry, it seems anathema, or it has historically seemed anathema. And so that was the impetus to work on the Fashion Act to see how the California fuel efficiency standards really created the movement in the auto sector, how Californian requirements on EVs is helping propel that entire industry and making billionaires, we won't go there, but it generates enormous amount of capital movement and enormous amount of wealth. And so that's what the Fashion Act is meant to do, and we're very grateful to have Ghani as a supporter of the Fashion Act. And if you are part of the coalition or a brand or NGO, if you could raise your hand that is part of the Fashion Act coalition. Yay, it's so good to see hands in here, and hopefully there'll be more hands raised as we leave. But it's setting the similar standards like the fuel efficiency standards. So it's having requirements of what a company that is selling into the state of New York, which is the 10th largest economy in the world, what should their emissions be, what should their chemical management be, and some of their labor protections. So what it allows is it raises the floor for the whole industry, because what we are seeing and what we've seen over the past year is it's very hard for innovations to scale because the system is not set up that if there isn't price parity, which as we even heard in the previous example, we're not seeing this scale and this adoption because the market is set up to go to the cheapest player. So that's what the Fashion Act is.
Thank you, Maxine, for sharing, like your story of starting a fashion brand and how it leads you to come up with this idea of a legislation to make an impact on the whole industry. I think this just really reminds us, when we're doing something and we got inspired, I feel everyone has this superpower of themselves. For Maxine is law and the writing, and I believe we all have our own superpower. So it's very inspiring to hear that. And also a very important takeaway for me, because you said you're very inspired by the EV policy, the fuel efficiency standard. And then I just want to say, like, a fashion industry, as we're getting more attention nowadays, there are a lot of transferable solutions from other sectors that we can use to decarbonize the fashion industry. So I think this actually represents a really great opportunity for the fashion industry, because other people have already paved the road for us. And yes, so also on the Fashion Act, this is like a really groundbreaking, I would say, effort. How is it evolving so far? What's the current stage of the Fashion Act?
Yeah, so the bill was first introduced 3 years ago, and I had to learn all of this. Law school actually doesn't teach you how a bill becomes a law, so I had to learn it along the way. And it's a landmark piece of legislation. The New York legislature, the capital is in Albany, not known as a fashion capital. And so we had to, over the past 3 years, engage with legislators to help them understand that this is an industry that has enormous impact, that American companies, New York companies, are being negatively impacted because they cannot compete in a race to the bottom, and that consumers, their citizens, are exposed to the flagrant abuse of lack of chemical management in this industry. So it has taken time, but those conversations have worked. We have grown a coalition. I think we have incredible NGO partners, some of whom are represented in this room, and it has been a collective, but not only of NGOs. The very powerful voices on this have been the innovation companies and the brands who are wanting to be a part of this future, who say, if I am here as a company wanting to do things sustainably, the most important thing I can do is help pass policy that is going to set the rules for the whole system. And they have been very important and effective voices in engaging with legislators. So at the end of last session, we finally built up the momentum in the legislature. So thousands of bills are introduced every year in the New York State legislature. The most common thing is that a bill sits there and languishes. It's not like everything is debated. That's kind of how I thought it worked, but that's not. So we built up enough political momentum that it was actually put on the agenda. It was put on an important Ways and Means agenda in the Assembly. And it was passed through that committee, and this was all movement happening in the very, very last days of session, and then it went to the Rules Committee in the last day of session, and then because there was movement, some of the laggards of the industry started lobbying and putting money towards confusing the bill, and that is kind of the moment where we've had to call time because the session ended. And the session will begin again in January. And what this is a call out for, because this is a bill that is now of really great importance within the legislature for any NGOs, brands, students, literally investors, anybody in this room can be a part of the Fashion Act coalition, because their voice is incredibly important in what is going to happen in January, and whether we are able to have this coalition of the future of the industry, the brands, the innovation companies, the students, everybody who wants to have a bright future for this industry. And we're looking to get the bill passed this session.
Thank you. Yes, and then we still have a few more months until January, and especially, Climate Week, Fashion Week. Hopefully, we have gathered more momentum to help get the bill passed. So thank you so much, Maxine, to share your insights on policy. And also just want to mention the institute that Maxine leads, the New Standard Institute, their focus is on utilizing data tools to identify solutions. So if any of the audience interested in data, make sure to speak with Maxine after our session today. And now we're going to move on to our second theme, finance, and Tricia is the person that we're going to be talking about finance. So it's kind of like emissions as well. I just want to paint this very clear picture for the audience. Can you tell us how much money do we need to finance that? How much?
Really, Sally, it's not one number. It's hundreds of billions of dollars. And I don't think anyone can really come up with the right number because it's so complex. The system change that needs to happen, it's not around just material innovation. There needs to be more on collection and sorting. I see Bank and Vogue in the room. There needs to be more on identifying. I see Constanza in the room from Sortile. So it's hundreds of billions of dollars to really bring around a true systems change. And I think this is where the industry is very caught up in right now. And from the conversations that I've heard this week, the finance industry doesn't necessarily understand how the textile industry works. And I don't even, and the apparel industry. And we all have to look at it in a new lens.
And also, I want to ask where those money will be coming from, like different sources, like which source nowadays have the most significant contribution?
Yes. Well, the money has to come from everyone and on all sides. I think most of all, though, when we get involved in these comparisons, like you mentioned, Maxine, the cost of garments, the cost of raw materials currently is not the true cost of those materials. Because in the end, we don't have any place for them to go. And so when you see right now new innovation trying to come into the market, it's hitting up against a brick wall because right now fiber prices are at all-time lows, and we need to really adjust the way we look at that. As far as where is financing coming from, it needs to come from all sides. It needs to come from private investors, from public investors. It needs to come from incentive programs, transition programs that need to come together for the industry. And we've seen that this presents a big challenge. And as you look at where funding will continue to evolve, that's where this week has been great to have these conversations together. But I think most of all, finance doesn't perhaps understand that this isn't short-term, this is really all long-term investment to make the change. And while the apparel industry is unique that there's seasonal changes, right? Everyone's always looking to change their clothes. We're fortunate that there's always all the seasons. So with every season, the industry has that opportunity to change. But any investment has to be in for the long haul. I mean, looking at what Dennis is building, that's 10 years out, you're trying to forecast this. It's very challenging.
Yes, so my takeaway is long-term and diverse sources investment. And also you mentioned that it's important to look at our different parts of the fashion value chain to put in the investment. I think that's kind of a little bit follow up from our previous panel discussion. We talk about, the brands versus the suppliers and other parts of the supply chain. Can you share a little bit insight on how financing can help balance the responsibilities? So as for, the suppliers is not the one that has to take all of the responsibility. How finance is helping different parts of the value chain to work together with each other.
Yes. I would say now when we look at the current system that exists, it's very dominated by the brands, and brands tell suppliers what to do.
And the supply chain is very fragmented, which makes it even more complicated. And as it's already been discussed, the system has been set up, as you said, rightfully so, Maxine, that it's chasing the lowest cost producing country. So therefore, investment keeps shifting around and moving from country to country. There needs to be some consolidation around that. And so suppliers are involved in that investment that needs to happen, and within their own systems, the evolution towards that change. But it's, I think, the impact that will come from legislation, which is amazing, the work that the New Standard Institute has been doing to really drive through. And we already see that legislation and the changes that are happening in Europe, the attention that the industry is finally getting. So where finance has to happen, it has to happen within brands, having some of their own mechanisms to fund the transition, as well as through the supply chain and the new players that are now involved. If you look at circularity, collectors, sorters, pre-processors, and recyclers were not previously a part of how the industry worked. So all of that needs to be financed, some of it through private, public, any of the mechanisms. I think when we can finally have some incentives on tax breaks, it will really help to move the needle. For example, if you look at synthetic fibers, they can be taxed at a duty rate of around 32% versus natural fibers. So how can we start to bring in new classifications for recycled fibers and provide that incentive?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this very interesting example about, the tax bracket and incentives. So now let's move on. We're going to come back to Tricia and Maxine. But now I think it's time to move on to talk about business models. So today we have two experts here highlighting the role of business models. One is from an individual brand, Gani, and then one, Sarah, she overlooks the trend and the entire fashion industry. And I want to start with Nikolai, and let's talk about Gani. Gani, I have to make a little confession. That is one of my favorite fashion brand. Is not only because it has very stylish design, but it's very practical too. I read the new book that you guys just published, Gani Playbook. You're saying the goal of Gani is to design stylish clothes for the Copenhagen girls who can also ride bikes in their daily life. So pretty and utilitarian at the same time. And Gani has been around for the past 10 years, I believe, more than 10 years.
More than 10 years.
More than 10 years, yeah. And it's been growing very rapidly during the past few years. Just share a personal anecdote, like wherever I go, I always see Gani stores around. There's one like in Williamsburg, and I think there's like 3 more in Manhattan. And I check your website, so you have about 20 stores in the United States, right? And then you have 20 in Copenhagen, not Copenhagen, in Denmark. And then you have another around 20 across Europe. And you even have 8 stores in China. So it is a really growing business. And the one thing unique about Gani is that you would openly tell people that you're not a sustainable brand, which is very confusing at the beginning. But then you explain that you understand there's this intrinsic contradiction between running a fashion business and being sustainable, and you identify yourself as a responsible brand, and you guys do the most you can to be responsible. And I think this is a very interesting philosophy. Can you share a little bit more on how you come up with this model and, just more details so for people to understand?
All right, yeah, I'll try. I always get a little bit nervous, and because I'm kind of embarrassed that whenever I represent the industry, right? Because we can all agree that we're in a bad place, right? And I'm the sole representative of a brand, but I'll do my best. So the whole kind of discussion on growth and being a fashion brand that's growing is a tough one, because it touches upon like an overall topic of degrowth that's extremely complicated, and don't think we should go into that now. I've been struggling to get my head around how that would work, because if there's one thing I know as a CEO or previous CEO of a fashion brand, but also as a climate tech investor, it is that the second there is no growth, all investment stops. Direct investments into climate tech startups, but also the investments that most players in the industry are at least doing at the moment in order to mitigate their climate footprint, right? So that stops immediately. It's just like the nature of the system we've created. Then there's kind of on a more personal level, I've had that discussion with myself over and over, like, can you run a fashion company when you're kind of preoccupied with the climate change agenda? And I always end up concluding that as long as there's a fashion industry, I can justify being in this industry if I'm doing better than the others, whatever that means, right? And then I think what we can do to kind of contribute to the conversation is bringing a lot of the things we're talking about down to something that's actionable, tangible, operational. And so we try to prioritize action over perfection. And just do things. We make a lot of mistakes in the process, right? But at least we're trying. So for instance, we've been mapping out and compensating for our carbon footprint since 2016. It was never to pay indulgence. It was to impose the carbon tax on our own behavior that politicians never had the guts to do. I've been very frustrated with that over the years because there's no doubt that regulations and law will change people's behavior immediately. So we did that for a while until we got to a point where I felt that like the idea of compensating were being exploited, right? So we converted to an insetting strategy, which means you take responsibility for your own supply chain and try to bring down the carbon footprint along that one. However, there are no industry standards, there are no kind of backing you on that one. There's necessarily not any credits to be had. And further to that, we don't control our own supply chain. But we decided anyway to start installing solar panels with our tier 1 suppliers, which we've done with 4 suppliers in Portugal and Italy. And bear in mind that we make up maybe 20% of order volume with these suppliers, and we might kind of switch to another supplier next season. But it's been an amazing project, and I'm sometimes kind of surprised as to how, don't get me wrong, but how easy it is to do things and kind of make a change, right? It just requires that you do it. I should have royalties from Nike because I use that phrase over and over again. But that goes back to the financing, and it's often left out of the financing discussion. It just requires shareholders that are willing to sacrifice profit for it. And that's like nobody is, or very few are. I mean, I know Dennis very well, and you're kind of putting together a stack of offtake agreements, right? And it's not easy because there are too few players out there willing to pay a premium on material. Same goes for installing solar panels with your suppliers, right? And we don't get any credit for that, but it's just a very kind of actionable, tangible example of stuff you can just do.
Thank you. And thank you for highlighting again this dilemma between, like growth versus investment, but also the growth and then sustainability, because, when you want to be sustainable, the growth may not be as fast as you do not grow sustainably. But then the investor, we're going to come back to Tricia, ask about, like what are some of the incentives besides profit so that the investors are more willing to invest. But now I think we're going to keep asking Nikolai question. I was going to ask you, how do you work with suppliers to kind of balance the responsibilities and to enable this transition? But I guess you already provided a pretty comprehensive answer. And I want to be a little bit more specific that in multiple panel discussion that you mentioned, you are a very data-driven person and you have a very data-driven approach to your company. And then second thing, these are not related, so you can answer them like separately. The second one, I know there's a Ghani lab, so you guys do a lot of material innovations as well. So can you talk about your data approach first, and then talk a little bit about your material innovation and how significant opportunity or area it represents for the kind of like a zero carbon transition for the business model?
Yeah, I don't know about the data-driven part. I mean, I come from a background in software, right? So I ended up in the fashion industry by coincidence. I always felt a little bit like an orphan, So basically, I just like data. But to an extent where, and I often quote Jeff Bezos on that, I think he was trying to make Amazon work in a way where it would only obtain 70% information before taking action, right? If you wait for like 90% to 100% certainty, you got analysis paralysis, right? You'll never make a move, right? So we've done ridiculous things, like we implemented like combustible plastics way back, right, based on some industry standards, and it turned out that they were not combustible, right? We also did combustible rubber boots. Like the problem was that they were so combustible that they disintegrated after 3 months, right? It was terrible. We make all sorts of mistakes there, but we try to apply a principle that I took with me from tech, which is like test small, fail fast, right? And do a lot of iterations. So that's just the kind of culture of what we do. And again, it often ends up being an excuse for a lot of players in the industry that we're waiting for regulations, we're waiting for industry standards, we're waiting for the others, right? Or we're waiting for the right answers, and there are no right answers. So you need to be able to make a lot of mistakes and just be transparent about it in the process, right? And then you mentioned Fabrics of the Future. It's not an in-house lab, it's an in-house initiative where we constantly monitor around 30 different fabrics or innovative material suppliers and try to help them, what we call, graduate into the core of our business. So a lot of these startups are struggling to figure out how they fit into the market, right? How their materials are working, like we test them for kind of performance, durability, look and feel, stuff like that. And then we kind of help them figure out if they're scalable, because it's a huge issue for often that some of these innovative new material suppliers are not scalable. But they play a core part of our ambition to bring down our carbon footprint by 50% in 2027. So around like 85% of our carbon footprint is derived from the product, 65% from the material itself. So we need to use alternative materials, right? Problem being that there aren't that many out there that are kind of commercially viable. So we help them kind of graduate. And I'm so happy we showed in Paris this Tuesday. I just got here from Paris flying. I couldn't find a train. And on the runway show, we had 7 new innovative materials like alternative leathers, recycled poly, recycled cottons, and another 2 that goes into the collection. So it was a proud moment for me. And that's a good example of how we kind of work with those suppliers. And can I just mention, because this is probably the other thing I'm super proud of, and I'm not proud of a lot in this industry, but so for our baseline is 2021, right? And we're aiming for the 50% reduction by 2027. And we've been growing on average 18% annually since then. And we've managed to bring down our carbon footprint by 7% in absolute terms. And being a fashion company that kind of relies on newness, that's well done. I'm really proud of that, and yeah. Thanks.
That's very impressive. And then the next topic I want to move on, it also has to do a lot with business. As we mentioned, overproduction is a very big issue. I just want to ask Nikolai, because you just mentioned, there's seasonality for the clothes and the collections. Do you feel you're facing a very big overproduction issue, or have you what innovative method have you been taken to kind of helping to curb this overproduction issue?
It was said before, this industry relies on overproduction, totally. I mean, we kind of adhere to the, what do you call it, a conservationist hierarchy that I also apply to my own life. And in my words, that is avoid, reduce, mitigate, compensate. I actually didn't buy any clothes for 7 years, except for undies now and then. It was kind of weird when you run a fashion company, but I did that. We applied the same kind of principles to how we deal with inventory, right? So we try not to overproduce. We have around 1% what we consider dead stock, but the rest we sell it, or we recycle it, upcycle, recycle, downcycle, or it ends up at dead stock. So 1% is very little for the industry, but it's still 1%, right? And that's then dealt with by a big international organization in Germany that handles it and are contractually obliged to not incinerate it. But it's still kind of a liability in my book that we're looking at.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing the information and the insight. Yeah, 1%, I think it's pretty low compared to the industrial average. So very impressive on that, Nikolai. And also, Sarah, you moderated a session on overproduction just this past summer at the Global Fashion Agenda. Do you have any just like overall observation on the overproduction issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think Amy mentioned the practice of bracketing, and overproduction is really interesting because it's built into the model of the way the industry functions. For most brands, as Amy said, they will plan to overproduce by a certain amount, and really that's because the way they report financially makes it so that it is cheaper to overproduce and have things that you cannot sell at full price than it is to not have those things to sell and risk making that sale. And what you'll see, most companies at a mass market level will just move that stock, excess stock. They'll first put it on discount. So you'll see, most of the high street fashion brands that everyone will know, they'll have sales largely all year round now, and you'll get pretty hefty discounts. Stuff they can't sell there will move to outlet stores, and then eventually it ends up getting shipped abroad to be sold elsewhere. The luxury brands don't like to do that because it reduces the value of their brand to have things on discount. So historically, they have just destroyed excess inventory. Europe is bringing in a regulation that bans that. France already has that in place. So many of these companies now have a new problem about what to do with that inventory. It's a particularly pointy problem right now because the luxury industry is in a bit of a downturn, and many of them have a lot of excess inventory they have to deal with. And I don't think they've really figured out how. Some of them just have warehouses full of old stock. Some of them are taking stuff that's never been worn, never been sold, and recycling it. And I think we probably have all experienced going on resale sites and finding things at a nice discount, new with tags, which makes us all feel very good about ourselves. But we're not really reducing the problem when we do that.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. We're going to come back to you with more questions. But while we're on overproduction, I just want to ask Maxine and Tricia, do you have any insight from the policy and finance perspective to perhaps help incentivize the industry to produce a little bit less?
Sure, I'll jump into that because I think, as you mentioned, New Standard Institute is about data, so we love data also. And I think in these conversations, I always, I'm trying to see the thing as a system. And what I see, like Ghani, I'm thinking in the auto sector, like it's the Tesla or the Rivian. It's like the cool, I'll say Rivian because I have judgments about it. It's like the cool leading company that makes a really great product that is leading in that sector. And I use auto because like we understand that somehow better. But without law, like people aren't adopting the EVs maybe as fast as we see it is needed by climate science. So I feel like sometimes in the fashion industry, we somehow we want Ghani to win, and we just hope that it does. And we hope that the Ghanis of the world take over, even with the evidence to the contrary. And so I just wanted to position that because law, which we've used in other sectors to move things forward in more significant ways, helps fuel all of that adoption to make the Ghanis not just, our society is getting so segmented that we have the people who want the cool product and want to feel good about their purchase shopping at Ghani, but meanwhile, the trend is moving again in the opposite direction. So the law helps make that requirement, going back to what Tricia was saying about financing and saying everybody needs to be involved. Well, they're not involved across the system because there isn't price parity. So the only way we actually address the system of fashion and the units that Amy Jaffe was talking about in terms of our actual emissions from this entire sector is through the law, and that fuels and makes the Ghanis an incredible investment opportunity. It makes the innovation companies incredible investment opportunities, because what is not the goodness of people, of investors' hearts, but it is the law. So it helps all of that. It helps with waste, it helps with decarbonization, it helps with chemical management, it helps with labor.
Yeah, I mean, we have an opportunity now to level up, right? And to set a new standard. No pun there, but